Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something really significant for the future of medicine.
Hmm.
It's how artificial intelligence is being looked at by the FDA when it comes to, well, approving drugs and biological products.
Yeah,
They've just put out this draft guidance on using AI in their regulatory decisions. And, well, this is a development you really need to know about.
absolutely. AI isn't some, far off concept in our field anymore. It's actively being used right now
Right.
in all sorts of stages, from figuring out how drugs work all the way to ensuring their quality during manufacturing. This draft guidance from the FDA, it's a really clear signal.
Uh-huh.
They're moving to provide a framework for this evolving landscape. But
Yeah.
keep in mind, like you said, it is a draft.
Yeah.
It's still open for comments, for refinement.
Exactly. So our goal in this deep dive is really to pull out the crucial insights from this guidance.
Yeah, key takeaways.
The stuff that really matters for understanding the FDA's current thinking without you getting bogged down in, all the dense details. Think of this as your efficient way to get informed on a complex and frankly rapidly changing area.
Good way to put it.
We're focusing specifically on how the FDA is considering AI when it generates information or data that supports their decisions. Decisions about safety, effectiveness, or quality of drugs. And that includes, well, everything, standard meds, biologics, human, animal.
The whole gamut.
Mm.
And just to be super clear on what we won't be digging into deeply today,
Okay.
this guidance isn't primarily focused on AI used way back in the early drug discovery phase,
Right. The really early stuff.
or for like general operational efficiencies within a company that don't directly touch patient safety, drug quality, or say the reliability of trial data. They're quite targeted here.
Right. Very specific scope. So at its heart, what's the big idea? What are they trying to do?
It really boils down to building trust. Trust in these AI models.
Okay.
The FDA is proposing this step-by-step approach. They call it a risk-based credibility assessment framework.
Right. I saw that term.
And it's all designed to help figure out if we can actually rely on what an AI model tells us when making these critical regulatory decisions. And it really hinges on understanding the context of use. COU.
COU, context of use. That sounds key.
It is absolutely central. It basically defines the specific job the AI model is doing, its role and boundaries in tackling a particular question.
Okay.
And the FDA has laid out this 7-step framework to evaluate that credibility, and we're going to walk you through the most important bits.
Okay, sounds good. Let's jump into that framework then. Step 1, define the question of interest. Seems pretty straightforward.
It does on the surface, yeah, but it's foundational. Really, really important.
Okay.
This step is all about clearly, precisely stating the specific question the AI model is actually trying to answer. And the FDA gives a couple of really helpful examples to show why this clarity matters so much.
All right, let's hear the clinical development one first.
Okay, so imagine you have a drug. Let's call it drug A. It works, but it has this known serious, potentially life-threatening adverse reaction. Happens in a small number of patients.
Right, yeah.
Historically, maybe everyone in the clinical trials got monitored in the hospital for 24 hours after getting the drug, just to be safe.
Standard procedure.
But maybe some early data suggests, certain patients, based on their specific characteristics, are actually at a very, very low risk of this reaction.
Ah, okay.
So the question of interest becomes, which participants can we reliably identify as low risk so they don't need that intense, maybe burdensome inpatient monitoring after dosing?
Gotcha. That's a very practical, focused question. Big implications for patients, trials.
Exactly. Efficiency, patient experience, all of that.
What about the manufacturing example? Drug B, was it?
Right. Drug
Yeah.
B, this one's an injectable. And for injectables, getting the fill volume, the amount of drug in each vial absolutely spot on, is critical for quality.
Sure is. Can't mess that up.
So the company wants to use an AI system, maybe using cameras, visual inspection, to automatically check if the fill levels meet the required standards.
Makes sense. Automation.
So here, the question of interest is pretty direct. Do these individual vials of drug B meet the established fill volume specifications? Yes or no, basically.
Okay, so in both cases, it's about getting super clear on the specific piece of info you need the AI to give you.
Precisely.
And you mentioned earlier the AI's answer isn't necessarily the only thing they look at, right?
That's a really important point that guidance makes. Other evidence, traditional lab results, animal study data, info about the manufacturing process itself, All of that can and often should contribute to answering the overall question.
Uh-huh.
The AI model works alongside these other sources. It's about the totality of the evidence.
Right, looking at the whole picture. Okay, so that's step one, defining the question. Moving on to step two, define the context of use, the COU. How does this build on step one?
So the COU takes that specific question we just defined and really zooms in. It defines the precise role and the scope of the AI model in answering it.
Okay.
It spells out exactly what the model will do, what data goes in, what comes out, and crucially, how those outputs will actually be used to make a decision. Think of it like the AI's specific job description for this task.
Got it. Let's go back to drug A, the clinical trial monitoring example. What's the COU look like there?
Okay, so in that case, the AI model predicts the patient's risk of that bad reaction
Yeah.
based on their baseline characteristic, maybe some lab values.
Right.
Now, here's the critical part of the COU for that example. The AI model's prediction solely determines the monitoring setting.
Ah, solely. That's a big word there.
It is.
Yeah.
The AI output directly decides inpatient or outpatient monitoring. So its assessment has a direct, significant impact on how that patient is managed in the trial.
Yeah, high stakes, definitely. Now, flip side, drug B in manufacturing. What's the COU there?
For drug B, remember the AI is analyzing images to flag vials with potentially wrong fill volumes.
Mhm.
But the important difference here in this COU is the scope of its influence. The company also does separate independent checks.
Ah, right.
Maybe they test a sample of vials from each batch using a different method as part of their standard quality control before releasing the product.
Right.
So while the AI gives that automated first pass, it's not the only deciding factor. It's not the sole determinant for product release.
Okay, so it's more like an initial screening tool, but there's a backup, maybe a human verified step or another process. That difference seems really important.
It's absolutely critical. And that difference leads us directly into step 3,
Yeah.
assessing the AI model risk.
Right.
This is where the FDA connects the dots.
Mm.
The idea is simple. The more critical the AI's role and the more serious the potential fallout if it gets it wrong.
The more scrutiny it gets.
Exactly. The more scrutiny it faces.
Okay, so how exactly do they define this model risk?
As they frame it, model risk is basically a combination of two things: model influence and decision consequence.
Influence and consequence. Okay.
Model influence is about how much weight the AI's output carries in the final decision. How much are you relying on it compared to other information?
Right, like sole determinant versus one input among many.
Precisely. And decision consequence is, well, just what it sounds like. The potential negative impact if a decision based on that AI output turns out to be wrong. How bad could it be?
Got it. Let's apply that. Back to drug A, patient monitoring.
Okay, drug A.
Yeah.
We said the model influence is high, right? It's the sole determinant of monitoring level.
Yep, high influence.
And the decision consequence is also high. If a high-risk patient gets misclassified as low risk, they miss crucial monitoring.
Could be life-threatening.
Exactly. Could have severe outcomes. Therefore, in the FDA's risk framework, this scenario screams HIGH model risk.
Makes total sense.
And notice the key insight here isn't just about how fancy or complex the AI is. It's about how critical its role is in that specific context, especially concerning patient outcomes. That's a primary lens they're using.
High reliance, high potential harm, if wrong, equals high risk. Simple logic. Okay, now drug B, the fill volumes.
Right, drug B. The decision consequence is still significant, definitely. Incorrect fill volumes aren't trivial.
No, affects quality, potential dosing errors.
Right. Could impact product quality, maybe lead to medication errors, but remember that independent verification step?
Ah, yes, the backup check.
Because that exists, the model's influence is considered lower. The AI is helpful, maybe speeds things up, but it's not the ultimate gatekeeper.
Okay.
So in this case, the model risk would likely land somewhere in the medium category. You've got significant consequence, but lower influence.
So it's that interplay. I saw they had a graphic, like a matrix, showing this.
Yeah, the model risk matrix. It visually lays out how influence and consequence combine. High is obviously high risk, low is low risk, and the others fall in between. It just helps conceptualize it.
And it really drives home that it's not just about AI performance in a vacuum. It's about performance in context, what happens if it fails, and how much are we counting on it.
Exactly. And this risk assessment, whether it's high, medium, or low, is the absolute foundation for the next step, step 4.
Which is?
Developing a plan to establish AI model credibility.
Okay, so the level of risk dictates the plan.
Precisely. The higher the assessed model risk, the more comprehensive, the more rigorous this credibility plan needs to be.
And this plan is basically the roadmap for proving the AI is trustworthy.
That's exactly it. It outlines all the steps a company intends to take to convince the FDA, essentially, that their AI model is reliable and genuinely fit for that specific context of use.
Makes sense.
And this is a point where the FDA really, really encourages early conversations.
Talking to them before finalizing the plan.
Yes, they strongly encourage sponsors to engage early to discuss their thinking on the model risk assessment and their initial ideas for the credibility plan. Get on the same page early.
Avoid surprises later.
Exactly. Now, this plan, this is where, the rubber really meets the road. Because the FDA is serious about trust, they've laid out some pretty detailed expectations for what goes into this plan. It breaks down into two main areas.
Okay, 2 parts to the plan. What's the first one?
The first part is really a deep dive into the model itself and, crucially, how it was developed.
Okay.
This means explaining the model's guts, its inputs, its outputs, the architecture, how it picks out important features from the data, the specific parameters used,
And nuts and bolts.
and also the rationale. Why did you choose this specific type of model? Why this approach?
So they want to understand the black box a bit better, or at least how it was built. What else?
Critically, data. A very thorough description of the data used to actually build the model, the training data, the tuning data.
Okay, what about the data?
Everything. How was it collected? How was it processed or cleaned? How was it labeled or annotated if needed? How is it stored? And is this data actually fit for purpose? Is it relevant to the COU? Is it reliable? Is it representative of the real world? Is it traceable, securely stored, centralized or distributed?
So basically, they want the full pedigree and quality report for the data that built the AI.
You got it. Think of it like providing the complete manufacturing record and quality control data for a drug substance. Same level of detail, same principle. Garbage in, garbage out applies to AI too.
That level of data transparency makes a lot of sense in this regulated space. What about the actual training process itself, how the model learned?
That's also a key piece of this first section. The plan needs to detail the learning methodology. Was it supervised learning with labeled examples? Unsupervised. Reinforcement. They want to know the specific performance metrics used during development and tuning. Things like area under the curve, AUC, recall, specificity, positive and negative predictive values.
Standard metrics.
Right. Maybe confusion matrices, likelihood ratios, precision, F1 scores. Importantly, with confidence intervals to understand the uncertainty.
Okay, not just the number, but how sure you are about it.
Exactly. Plus, how did you handle potential overfitting where the model gets too good at the training data but fails on new data? Or underfitting where it's too simple.
Right, finding that balance.
Details about training settings, like hyperparameters, if you used any pre-trained models as a starting point.
Which is common now?
Very common. You need to explain where they came from, how they were originally trained, and how you adapt to them. If you combine multiple models, an ensemble method, describe that. How are the outputs calibrated to give meaningful probabilities or scores? And finally, the quality assurance around the software code used for training. Was it version controlled? Tested?
Wow. Okay, that is incredibly detailed. It really shows they are taking the trust but verify approach very seriously here.
They absolutely are.
So that's the first big part of the credibility plan, the model and its development. What's the second main area?
The second area shifts focus to how the final trained model is evaluated. How do you prove it actually works?
Okay, testing time.
Essentially, yes. This is about testing its performance. Ideally, on a completely separate set of data it has never seen before, the independent test data.
All right, gotta see how it does on new stuff.
This gives you a much more unbiased estimate of how it's likely to perform out there in the real world, in its intended COU, and just like the training data.
Let me guess, they want all the details on the test data too.
You guessed it.
Yeah.
How is it collected, processed, annotated? They really hammer home the need for independence between the development training data and this test data.
Makes sense. Can't test it on the answers it already knows.
Exactly. If there's any overlap for some unavoidable reason, it needs to be very clearly explained and justified. And if there's a standard reference method, a gold standard way of getting the right answer for the task the AI is doing.
Like a definitive lab test or expert diagnosis?
Right. That needs to be described how it relates to the test data. Is the test data labeled using that gold standard?
Okay. And then the actual performance on this test data, how well did the model do?
That's obviously the core of it. The plan needs to describe how you'll measure and report the agreement between the model's predictions and the actual observed outcomes in that test data.
Right.
It also needs to justify why the chosen evaluation methods are appropriate. Appropriate for the specific AI technique, appropriate for the COU. especially, they note, if there's a human in the loop.
Ah, so if a person is still involved in the final decision.
Yeah, how does the AI evaluation account for that interaction? And yes, those same performance metrics we talked about for training AUC, recall, specificity, PPV, NPV, etc., they come back here.
With confidence intervals again, I assume?
With confidence intervals again, absolutely. Plus, an estimation of the model's uncertainty. How confident is it in its predictions?
It sounds like they want a really clear-eyed view, warts and all. Not just how well it works, but also where it might struggle.
That's exactly the point. The plan needs to address limitations. What are the known weaknesses? Are there potential biases? Biases that might have come from the data it was trained on, or biases inherent in the model's design?
Important consideration.
Very. And finally, just like with the training software, they want to know about the quality assurance for the code used in the evaluation process itself. Make sure the testing code is reliable and bug-free.
Okay, so step 4 is laying out this incredibly detailed plan to build and test the model's credibility scaled to the risk. What about the remaining steps, 5, 6, and 7?
They flow logically. Step 5 is basically do it. Execute the plan you just laid out.
Okay, carry out the plan.
Step 6 is documenting the results. Everything you found, the good, the bad, the ugly, goes into what they call a credibility assessment report.
Right?
And importantly, you also need to document and explain any deviations from the original plan.
Yeah.
Maybe you had to change a metric or use a different data set, subset. Why?
Transparency again?
Always. And the guidance points out that companies should talk to the FDA about when and how to submit this report. So not always clear-cut.
Ah, okay. It might depend on the situation.
Yeah, maybe it's part of a bigger regulatory submission, like an IND or BLA. Maybe it's for a specific meeting. Or maybe it's something you just keep on file and have ready if they ask for it during an inspection. Needs discussion.
Got it. And then step 7, the final step, the judgment call.
Precisely. Step 7 is determining if the AI model is actually adequate for its intended context of use, based on everything in that credibility assessment report,
So, did it pass the test?
essentially. And the outcome isn't always yes. Based on the evidence, the FDA or maybe even the company itself might conclude, you know what, this model isn't quite reliable enough for this specific job, given the risks involved.
Okay, so what happens then if credibility isn't established?
The guidance suggests several possibilities. You might need to downgrade the model's influence, rely on it less,
Right, maybe add more human checks.
or increase the rigor of the assessment, maybe gather more data, run more tests, implement additional controls around its use, maybe try a completely different modeling approach. Or, ultimately, you might have to reject or significantly revise the original COU. Maybe the AI just isn't ready for that particular task yet.
So it seems like a very iterative process, potentially, room for adjustment based on the evidence.
Definitely, if
Yeah.
not necessarily pass-fail on the first try.
Now, the guidance also talks quite a bit about lifecycle maintenance. Why is that so important specifically for AI models in this context?
Yeah, that's a crucial section. Because AI models, especially ones used continuously, like throughout the drug product life cycle, think about AI monitoring quality in a manufacturing line month after month.
Right, not just a one-off analysis.
Exactly. These models aren't static tools like, say, a simple calculator. They can be very sensitive to changes in the input data they see over time. Data drift is a real phenomenon.
Meaning, the real-world data starts to look different from the data it was trained on.
Precisely. And that can degrade performance. Plus, some AI models, depending on how they're set up, can even continue to learn or adapt over time. Self-evolution, you could call it.
Ah, okay. So its behavior might change even after it's been deployed.
It could, which means its performance and reliability can change after that initial validation. It's not a validate once and forget about it situation.
Gotcha. So continuous vigilance is needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The FDA really emphasizes the critical need for ongoing monitoring. Keep tracking those key performance metrics over time to ensure the model stays fit for purpose.
Makes sense.
And they advocate for a risk-based approach here, too. The level of ongoing monitoring and maintenance should be proportional to that initial model risk assessment.
So higher risk models need more intense ongoing checks.
You'd expect so.
Yeah.
For example, in manufacturing, any changes to the AI model itself or even changes to the manufacturing process that feed data into the model need to be carefully managed.
Through the regular quality systems.
Exactly. Handled through the site's established pharmaceutical quality system, including change management procedures.
And if there are significant changes made to the model or the process, does that trigger reevaluation?
It might. Depending on the change, yeah, parts of that original credibility assessment plan might need to be re-executed,
Right.
retraining, retesting on new data, reassessing performance.
Okay.
And importantly, significant changes that could impact the model's performance, especially related to product quality or safety, likely need to be reported to the FDA under existing regulations for post-approval changes.
Right. Standard practice for manufacturing changes.
And the guidance even mentions potentially using tools from quality guidelines like ICHQ-12, things like established conditions or comparability protocols, as ways to formally manage and report these AI model lifecycle changes.
Okay, integrating it into existing quality frameworks, that makes sense for sustainability. Finally, you mentioned early engagement before, but the guidance really seems to hammer this point home. Why the strong push for companies to talk to the FDA early and often?
I think it's because this is such a new and fast-moving area for everyone, including the FDA.
Right, uncharted territory to some extent.
Exactly. They want to foster open communication. Early interaction gives companies a chance to, sanity check their plans, get feedback on their proposed COU, their risk assessment, their initial thoughts on the credibility plan.
Make sure they're not heading down a dead end.
Precisely. It helps align expectations early, understand the FDA's potential concerns, and hopefully avoid major delays or roadblocks much later in the development or review process. It's about collaboration, really.
And they didn't just say, talk to us. They actually provided a whole list of specific programs and contact points for these discussions, didn't they? Beyond just the standard formal meetings.
They did, yeah. Table 1 in the guidance is actually super helpful here. It lists a whole bunch of different engagement pathways tailored to specific AI applications.
Like what?
Well, for instance, there's the Center for Clinical Trial Innovation, C3TI, specifically for discussing AI use in clinical trial designs. There's the Complex Innovative Trial Design Program, CID, if you're proposing really novel trial structures using AI. Then you've got programs like Drug Development Tools, DDTs, and iSTAND,
iSTAND.
Innovative Science and Technology Approaches for New Drugs. Both are pathways if you're trying to get an AI-based tool formally qualified for a specific purpose in drug development.
Ah, okay. Qualifying the tool itself.
Right. Then there's the Digital Health Technologies Program, DHTs, for AI-enabled sensors or apps used in trials. There's the EDSTP
Let me guess. Emerging drug safety.
technology program, exactly, for using AI in pharmacovigilance, so post-marketing safety monitoring.
Got it.
For manufacturing specifically, there's CDER's Emerging Technology Program, ETP, and CBER's equivalent, the Advanced Technologies Team, CATT.
Okay, dedicated manufacturing contacts.
Yep. And even for things like using AI in model-informed drug development, there's the MIDD Paired Meeting Program. And for using AI in real-world evidence studies, there's the RWE program.
Wow, that's actually quite a comprehensive list. It really shows they're trying to provide specific doors for people to knock on, depending on what they're doing with AI.
It does. It signals they're serious about wanting that dialogue across the entire drug lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
And for each one, they generally provide contact info, like an email address or where to find more info on the FDA website.
Very helpful. Proactive engagement seems key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It underlines the FDA's commitment to figuring this out collaboratively.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together then. The big picture takeaway seems to be that the FDA is definitely being proactive here. They're tackling AI head-on with a very structured, risk-focused approach for integrating it into drug development, manufacturing, regulation.
Right. This draft guidance lays out that detailed step-by-step framework. And the core principle running through it all is establishing credibility, establishing trust in these AI models for their specific jobs, their specific COUs.
And it's so important to keep saying, this is a draft.
Crucial reminder, this is the FDA's current thinking. It's out there specifically to get feedback.
So comments are welcome.
Absolutely. Anyone involved in this space development, manufacturing, regulatory affairs, you really should take a look at this framework, understand it, and consider providing your perspective to the FDA.
Definitely. Because this guidance, or whatever final form it takes, really does have the potential to significantly shape the future. Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
How will this framework ultimately influence pharmaceutical innovation? You know, the speed, the nature of it. Will it find that right balance?
Yeah, the balance between harnessing AI's power, which is immense, and maintaining that rigorous oversight that's absolutely essential for patient safety and drug quality.
Think about the implications. How quickly could new treatments get to patients? How will we ensure ongoing drug quality in an AI-driven manufacturing world? What will regulatory submissions even look like in the future?
Those are the big fundamental questions swirling around this. It's fascinating and incredibly important.
So we definitely encourage you to explore this more. As we said, the full draft guidance is up on the FDA's website. Take a look. And check out those specific engagement programs if they seem relevant to what you do or what you're interested in.
It's worth the time.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the FDA's AI guidance. It's complex, no doubt, but definitely an essential topic as we navigate the future of medicine.